Studios. I'm Gary Walker, and today is a special day for us here because we're going to take a look inside, figuratively and literally, because we have a very special guest with us, someone who, in a couple of weeks, will become a major contributor to what we do here at WBGO Studios with her podcast that in February will celebrate 2 years. And that podcast is Milestones, a deep dive look into recordings of note, celebrating anniversaries, people of note that deserve celebration and investigation, and just a chat about their considerable lives. I want to welcome to WBGO Studios a lady that we actually worked together way back when she was our public relations person at WBGO, Angelika Beener. And Angelika, thank you for joining us. It's great to see you again.
It's so wonderful to see you, Gary. Thank you so much for having me. This is exciting.
It is, and it's exciting to welcome you into the fold of WBGO, considering an award-winning producer. Your work has been featured at National Public Radio, at Jazz at Lincoln Center. You've been recognized by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for your work. A couple of years ago, Jazz in July, part of the celebration that goes on each year at the 92nd Street Y. The subject was Marvin Gaye, What's Going On? And it was an inside look into the life of Marvin Gaye, where yourself and Christian McBride and Marvin's son, I believe, was also part of the conversation about what's going on. And that subject was also the subject of one of your podcasts, celebrating the 50th anniversary of What's Going On, a very seminal recording when you consider what was going on at the time this record was made and who was making it, and the fight that he had to wage against inside forces at the Motown record label. We're talking about Marvin Gaye.
That's right. That's right. Marvin Gaye's brother had been in the war, and Marvin, like, Stevie, a year or so later, these Motown artists were looking to say something a little bit more considerable in their music, and weighty, I would even say, because sure, love and heartache and all those things are a part of life. But when they wanted to talk about the tougher subjects, it was scary for the label.
Well,
And
I was going to say, put yourself in the year 1971 and what was going on at the time. And the music back then in the 60s and into the 70s, the music was more of a message than it later became a massage. And with reference to that former subject, Marvin wanted to do a recording that spoke to some of the things that were going on around him, because after all, when someone makes a recording, it's all about what's going on around them, isn't it? Well, what's going on? He wanted to address that subject. And at first, Berry Gordy said, I don't know about this. But hey, he won out, just like Stevie Wonder did when he took control of his own publishing at that same company.
That's right. Yeah. And boy, did it pay dividends, didn't it? I mean, it was I think it was the biggest, Motown album certainly of that year, and I think it might be either that or what Songs in the Key of Life. I think they're kind of neck and neck as the most successful Motown albums to date. So I'm glad that Berry, despite his initial hesitance, that he got on board, because I think what he saw was that although, the Motown machine was very buttoned up and very, they wanted to present a certain way. And I can certainly understand that, being a Black organization and you want your first time out to we can't afford to make mistakes, unfortunately. So I get the idea that he wanted to not make a mistake. But I think the people's response, right? Our response to what Marvin was doing was what he realized what was most important.
He did indeed, and that's why I think it's Rolling Stone magazine said that that recording is one of the top recordings of all time, if not the top recording of
That's
all
right.
time. What's going on? We're chatting with Angelika Beener in a couple of weeks. She will bring her podcasting skills to the WBGO Studios, and a podcast that she's been an integral part of since she came up with it in a year ago, May. So it's coming up on 2 years for you. Tell me and tell the folks that are watching right now, what was your inspiration to do a podcast like Milestones?
It was the 10th anniversary of my time writing full time. So when I had sustained a long-term injury with the birth of my son. And I realized that I wasn't going to be able to go back into the workforce in the way that I had understood what the workforce was in the traditional sense of the workforce. And I was at a crossroads. And I had to sort of rethink the trajectory of my career. And so I started a jazz blog called Alternate Takes. And, it was a way for me to, as a new mom, to sort of keep one foot still in my professional world and still feel like I could contribute to the music that I love so much. Um, but and it was great. I'm very proud of that work. It's been a decade, so I've grown a lot, both as a writer and just as an observer and as a thinker. I've lived, a lot of life. And then my writing sort of shifted with raising a little boy, a little Black boy, and I started writing for Cultured Child, which is still my writing platform, my sort of essay platform. And so last year, I was like, wow, I was reflecting, and I said, wow, it's been 10 years. Um, I think I'm ready to not stop writing, but I think I'm ready to sort of expand the ways that I can reach people.
Your
As a
writing has also been featured on a number of albums. People of the Sun, for example, with Marcus Strickland, among many, many others. And you've been published in and around. You've also been not only a record co-producer, but also an event producer. We'll get to that a little bit later on because it brings us right back home to Newark.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And
But
yeah.
but the writing actually took precedent, and that was where your background lies primarily, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I said, well, it's a 10-year mark. I'm very big into these like anniversaries, which sort of leads into how we got to Milestones. So I said, wow, it's been 10 years. And I said, well, I think I want to let people in and hear my voice, not just my pen voice, but hear my voice. And I love talking about music. It's my favorite thing to do. So my good friends in high school, we would sit, I went to music and art. So we would sit and talk about records and, liner notes and things like that. And a lot of those conversations were really, really good. Sometimes we'd be on the phone for 8 hours, 9 hours, no kidding. My mother would come in the room and be like, okay, it's time to hang up kind of thing, and it's one of my favorite things to do. And I thought, wow, why not let an audience into some of those conversations?
And a fascinating look indeed. And I've listened to probably a half a dozen of your podcasts, and the thread that runs through almost all of them for me and for your guests was this music is really a family affair. And I think, people on the outside tend to not notice that and not recognize it and not realize the fact that many times this music is what brings people together. Christian McBride talking about, his father, another bass player, his uncle, a radio promotions guy who was responsible for Christian and his mom going to what Christian believes was his very first concert to see Marvin Gaye in
Right.
Philadelphia.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, and Marcus Strickland talking about growing up in his family's home, and he says, I remember that one record that my father had, and it had the picture of like a gorilla or something on the cover, and I said, I know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. In fact, I saw them at in Cleveland along with O.C. Bisa. Mandrill is who we're talking about here, but I
Yeah.
saw them in a concert one afternoon with O.C. Bisa, Parliament Funkadelic, and Rare Earth. The concert was like 5 hours long. I still remember it. It was back in the 70s. But he remembered that album cover. And then later on, his father would introduce him to the music of John Coltrane and say, this is what's going on here, and this is what's going on here. And it was an inspiration for him, I think, early on to pursue music full-time as a career.
That's right. That's right. I think you make a great point because music is one of those things, and I think maybe one of those rare things that we have a very intimate relationship with how it came into our lives. We never forget that moment that we heard something that changed our lives, or we heard something that made us fall in love, or music is rare, is unique, I should say, in that way.
I remember Jeremy Pelt chatting with you on the 50th anniversary of a seminal Freddie Hubbard recording, Straight Life, that he did for the CTI record label. And early at WBGO, when I first started there, we had one of our first volunteers was a lady named June Kim, and she would come in on a regular basis and she would say, my nephew's 8 years old and he's just started playing the trumpet, and you should hear him play. He's going to be amazing. And every family member's got a story like that, but
all the kids are amazing.
But every family member doesn't have a nephew who is Jeremy Pelt. That's who she was talking about.
Oh my goodness.
So I thought, June was right. All those years ago, she was right about her young nephew when he picked up the trumpet.
Absolutely.
Or chatting with Greg Osby on the 60th anniversary of Miles Davis, and someday my prince will come. And he talked about growing up himself as a kid and the variety that was around him musically, on the radio, in the record stores, where he could go in and, what's this? And what's this? And what's this? And then he connected the dots in a way that said, Miles Davis probably said the same thing.
That's right.
He went with his wife his wife was a professional dancer, and she took him to a concert one night to see a dance troupe. And when he got out of the concert, he went to the record store and he bought every flamenco dance record he could get his hands on. And then downstream a little bit comes Miles Davis and Gil Evans' Sketches of Spain.
Isn't that something? Yeah. And that kind of goes back to that thing, right? That moment that you have an epiphany. Music can bring these wild epiphanies and change, and that album was, it opened up what it meant to be a jazz musician, so much of what Miles did, but certainly that was one of them, I think, that was a blueprint for what it meant to be a more holistic artist.
Well, in the same way that when you chat, with Marcus and you talk about, John Coltrane,
Oh,
and how John Coltrane approached a standard.
Yes,
and made it his own. But then Marcus pointed out in that same podcast, and this is where I learned something. This is the cool thing about being in our world like this, is there's not a day that goes by that we don't learn something. And he said,
that's right.
what you need to listen for in that recording is what McCoy Tyner does and
Yes.
how he takes that tune to another level. And this is after I also found out, and this was a surprise to both of us, that there was actually a pianist before McCoy Tyner.
Right. Exactly. When I talked to Christian McBride about Charles Stepney, and he brought up that Joe Sample had played that iconic gliss down the piano right before I Want You Back comes on by the Jackson 5. And I said, what? And I said, I said, you're like the perpetual student and the master teacher all rolled up in one. And he said something very important that really lends to what you're saying right now, is that we never stop learning. If we're listening, we never stop learning. You said every day we will learn something new. And that's a fact. And I think that that's the thing that I love most about music, is that it's just a bottomless, topless. There's no, ain't no mountain high enough, however you want to say it. There's no way. I told my son, I had asked him, did he know, oh, it's escaping me. I asked him, did he know a particular artist? And he said, of course I do. And I said, it's okay not to know. I said, I said, I don't know that you know. So I'm just asking, because we will never know every song. We'll never hear every song. We'll never know every album, every artist. But when McBride said, you never stop learning in this music, and you're saying there's not a day goes by if we're really listening. I mean, that is also what makes me love talking about music. Even talking to you right now, I'm learning. And we're talking, so if you're open, if your mind is open and your heart is open, music can be one of the most gratifying things ever. Not just what we hear sonically on the record, but by having conversations. It's such a gratifying experience.
Well, when you talk about, for example, when you talk about Marvin Gaye and what's going on, after the fact, you have James Brown, Say It Loud, and I'm black and I'm proud, and you have little Stevie Van Zandt, and a whole cast of people saying, we ain't gonna play Sun City anymore. And they took the world of entertainment and used it as a major, major impact on the world of politics, on the world of economics in South Africa. And it ended up being a real sea change based on a recording.
That's right. That's right.
For
Steve,
you, as you do this podcast and you're coming to WBGO in just a couple of weeks, I'm excited about this. And Milestones will be a regular feature at WBGO Studios. And as you come to this, what have been some of the major things that you have learned about this music through the people that you've talked to? We've mentioned a couple of here. I have to ask you, is Riley Glasper a relative of yours?
that's my son.
Well, from listening to Riley talk about Jay Dilla, I gotta go check out Frank and Dank and Fat Cat.
I love it. Oh my
I gotta
God.
go check them out. Here I am, 73. I don't know these people, but yet when Riley Glasper talks about them and the influence and how this is all connected into a world, and Jay Dilla, a really big time player, affecting people not only within that world but outside that world, it makes me want to say, Frank and Dank, well, who are they? And Fat Cat, who's that?
Yes.
So I'm gonna learn something from Riley. So please tell him when you run into him that you ran into this old guy who was really moved by what he had to say.
He's going to be thrilled to know that. He's going to be thrilled.
But these are some of the episodes, we feature, or we're going to feature. We'll look back, we'll look ahead. Angelika Beener, and has put together Milestones that is about a year. It was May of 01, right?
For Milestones,
Yeah,
I think it's February of 21, if I'm not
February of
mistaken.
21.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're in the throes of the pandemic still in February of 21, right?
Yes,
and,
yes.
and people just urging and biting to talk about things. So your timing was pretty good for that, wasn't it?
It really was. It wasn't hard to book people. We didn't have to. There were no conflicting tour dates and things like that to consider. That's for sure.
Having chatted with some of these people about various subjects, Stevie Wonder's Music of My Mind, an anniversary of Freddie Hubbard's Straight Life, and the 60th anniversary of Miles, Someday My Prince Will Come, and of course Marvin Gaye, which we talked about, and John Coltrane too. What are some of the things that jumped out at you through conversations with your various guests that you went, gee, I didn't know that?
Yeah. Well, certainly finding out about Joe Sample being a part of the Motown machine. I didn't know that and the Crusaders, and how much they had worked on uh, on a lot of the Motown recordings. I think every episode you'll hear me say "what" at least one time. So that was a big one. Um, Talking to Jeremy Pelt about some of the recording budgets that the jazz musicians had in the 70s, and I couldn't believe all those zeros I was hearing for some of those people. I said, what? They were getting like R&B budgets. I didn't realize that. um I didn't realize we were in the same episode. Jeremy had hipped me to sort of why Donald Byrd had gone the more, if you will, commercial funk route, outside of, just being brilliant and having a breadth of musicality. He had also had Bell's palsy, and it had affected his playing. I didn't know that, so I mean, and certainly, just learning about each person's foray into music. I certainly didn't know about, what happened when these people were 8 years old, and, their grandmother was playing something in the background, or their uncle was a record, a disc jockey, all those things. So just deepening my understanding of the person. And then also these just amazing fun facts about the people who we were talking about, and even uh, yeah, having one understanding and walking away with another understanding, a deeper understanding.
Well, and you take that kind of attitude from the podcast situation, which once again in a couple of weeks we will welcome to WBGO Studios, and you take it out into the public. I remember it was about a year ago, a little more than a year and a few months, that I went to NJPAC for a special performance of The Roots and the Last Poet Society. And out walks Mayor Raz Baraka and performs one of his own raps with the Last Poets. And he got a standing ovation. And just a few weeks ago, Represent, you were an integral part of that, bringing that all back together with people like Nikki Giovanni, the gospel according to Nikki, and so many others. That must have been an incredible night.
Oh my goodness, Gary. I mean, when Christian McBride called me for that gig, I said yes without hesitation, hung up the phone and said, what did I just agree to? um, because it sounded, and it was monumental, it was historic, and it was something that I tend to be hard on myself. So I said, you got to get this right. There's no room for error. And, once I let those jitters go, not totally, because they never totally went away.
Yeah.
But once I allowed myself to um, let my imagination run free, let that little girl come out who had been listening to Arrested Development in 1992, and Spike Lee's Malcolm X movie came out, and uh, you know, watching Like It Is and Nikki Giovanni, and just taking myself back to almost that innocence, that playfulness. Then I was able to put something together that was cohesive, that there was a through line. They didn't want Nikki Giovanni to come out and do 3 songs and everybody clap and then she walk off. And then, a rapper come on and do his thing and then walk up. They really wanted it to be seamless and have some sort of unique flair to it. So that was really what I did. I just allowed myself to remember the childlike wonder of what it was like when each of these people came into my life.
And your work for that one night has a lasting influence because that night is part of City Verses, which is a collaboration between NJPAC and Rutgers, connecting the dots. Here we are again, between jazz and poetry.
That's right. That's right. And
so
yeah.
it's going to have a life, because so many times, and people, I mean, look at the world of jazz, people on the outside. And I think part of this is due to the fact of the way this music has been presented over the years. It's been, I don't want to say over intellectualized, because there is an intellect that runs so deep in this music, but almost imparting information that, well, and it could be something as, you're a DJ too, you understand. When you're doing a mic break and you go, well, of course, that was Roy Haynes on the drums. And if I'm listening out there and I go, Jesus, I didn't know that was Roy Haynes on the drums. Well, I'm too stupid. I don't know enough to appreciate the world of jazz, when the real thing is, if, like you said, be childlike, let yourself go, tap your foot, let your head move like the pigeon in the park, and you're there.
That's it. That's the key.
And then the investigation is for your own perusal, whether it be, how we grew up, reading liner notes and just taking all that information in, or picking up, a book, or checking out a podcast like Milestones. I mean, you sit there and you listen to Angelika and one of her special guests, and they talk about one of these seminal recordings, somebody like Jay Dilla, who is a major influence. And I learned that from a young man who was how old when you did that recording?
12.
12 years old, her son. And got me checking out Frank and Dank and Fat Cat and all this other stuff here soon.
That's right. He has definitely inherited my predilection for research, but he's got it and gone. I mean, this kid, I'm trying to catch up to him because, Jay Dilla was one of those artists that he discovered during the pandemic. Like you were saying, we were home, we were, kind of bored, we were all scared. And he's always loved music. And he had just come out of this wild Beatles phase. And we had just come back from London right before the pandemic. And we went on a tour, and, oh, this is where Paul McCartney lives, and this is where the Beatles recorded this and that. And then he's watching YouTube and he falls in love with Jay Dilla. Before I know it, he's listened to every interview. He's read every article. Now he's read the book, the great book that Dan Charnas has written about Jay Dilla. And he's just got this encyclopedic kind of mind that it's blowing me away. And so I said, you're 12, but I want to talk to you. I want people to hear what you have to say about Jay Dilla, because I think it's important that young people know that it's cool to know stuff. It's cool to be curious. It's cool to discover something you may not have. I mean, he went from Cream and the Beatles and Queen, and he still loves all those groups, by the way. And then it was Jay Dilla, and who knows who it'll be next. And I just want to encourage him. And I wanted him, through that interview, to show whoever may be listening who has young children to know that it's fun to learn. It's exciting
Stay
to learn.
open, man. That's what it's about. Stay open, and
That's it.
you'll make discoveries that may not come to you until many years later. I remember when I was a young teenager living in Florida, I went to see this guy one night, Wayne Cochran, who was like the white man's James Brown.
Oh.
Unbelievable, and had a hell of a band.
Mhm.
And the charts were just incredible. But unbeknownst to me at the time, his bass player was Jaco Pastorius, who was
What?
like 15 years old at the time. And all this time I thought, well, I never saw Jaco in concert. And it turns out I did.
You did? Oh my goodness.
But it took me until I was well into my 50s reading an article one night. And I thought, well, that's about the time I went to see Wayne Cochran in Clearwater. Well, that
Wow.
kid on the bass, that must have been Jaco Pastorius.
Amazing. Amazing. I mean, even that with this would be great for my podcast. I said, what? Jocko at 15. That's incredible. So you went to a lot of concerts when you were younger. Was that
Oh,
yeah.
quite a few.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a few. And the bands that you mentioned that your son was a fan of,
Mm-hmm.
I saw them all in concert. Just recently we lost the wonderful Christine McVie of Fleetwood Mac. I
Yeah.
saw Fleetwood Mac when they were a blues band.
Wow.
Before, and then I went and saw them again when a duo that had their own little thing going on the side, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, had a group called Buckingham Nicks, and they joined the band, and I went to see the band again that night, and I thought, well, this is something entirely different.
Right.
But this is something that is going to take the world by storm.
Absolutely.
And it turns out, it did. The first night I saw Carlos Santana, who was, and saw the band Santana. I went to see Jesse Colin Young and the Youngbloods come together. They had a big hit tune. And so I was living in Dallas at the time, and we went to the concert that night, and I looked at my ticket and I said, oh man, I don't think I got it. I think the guy sold me a ticket to something else. And he said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, it says here on this ticket, I think it's like a train ticket. It says Chicago Transit Authority. What the hell is that? Right. And boy, did I find out what the hell.
Boy, all right.
Oh, they were unbelievable.
Mhm.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
And I felt sorry for Jesse Cohen Young. I got a chance to see Banana, his keyboard player, touring with Steven Van Zandt on a tour about a year and a half ago. And I saw Stevie after the show, and I said, is that Banana? He says, yeah, man. I said, I have to meet this guy. And I told him about this story in the late 60s. I said, I was at that concert in Dallas when Chicago Transit Authority opened for you guys. And even Steven Van Zandt goes, Chicago opened for you?
Right.
The early days of music and the ongoing days of music continue. And we're chatting with Angelika Beener here on WBGO Studios about some of the great things that are in store upcoming as she rejoins, I should say, the WBGO family with a new podcast series for us anyway, called Milestones. What can we look forward to in the weeks ahead? I think your debut with us is in a couple of weeks from now.
Yeah, January 13th, which is a Friday, the 13th. So, I love Friday the 13th, thanks to a particular pianistic wonder in our jazz family, the great Thelonious Monk. So when I found out it was on Friday the 13th, I said, yep, that makes sense. That sounds good. But what I think, to answer your question, there will be some more recent milestones coming up because I'll still do I love the 70s. I feel like I was born in the wrong decade. I was born in the 70s, but I wish I was born in the 50s so that I could really hang out in the 70s or the early 60s. So there's always going to be some great milestones throughout the decades. But what I want to do and what is cooking for the upcoming new episodes is some more recent milestones, because I think it's important to also celebrate our peers and the folks of our time and give them their flowers while they're, still doing their thing, so there'll be some 10-year milestones, some 20-year milestones, so that's one of the things that I'm really excited about.
I look at something that came about last year called Celebrating 25 Years, the class of 96, people like Casey Benjamin and T.L. Cross and Drago Moore and others that came together and talked about, well, what's the last 20 or 25 years been for them? You also have quite a relationship, having written the liner notes for the Ron Carter recording, one of 2,300 recordings he's been part of. But dear Miles, and so you have a relationship there with somebody like Ron Carter. You've seen that documentary, Finding the Right Notes?
No,
Oh,
I haven't.
it's just magic.
Oh,
It's
wow.
just magic. And it's all about the life of Ron Carter. And, appropriately, here he is, a man of 85, I think he is now, and finding the right notes. So his search and his discovery continues. Something that a lot of folks on the outside might say, nah, Ron Carter, he knows it all.
Right.
Right?
Once you make the Guinness Book of World Records, you kind of think, well, he's got it.
Yeah, exactly.
But like you said, and like Christian said about that perpetual curiosity, being that student. And anytime I have the honor to rap with Ron Carter, even if it's for 5 minutes, you hear that curiosity. You still, obviously he's the one getting asked all the questions, but he has that curiosity, that curious spirit is still in him.
It's alive and well, which explains well into his 80s why he still continues to make such incredible music. A couple of years ago, I had the good fortune to actually go to his apartment and talk to him about returning to Detroit. He was born in Ferndale. And I said, you're the other cool guy that I know that was born in Ferndale. He said, yeah, who was the other one? I said, my father.
Really?
So my father was born in Ferndale as well. So, so I go in there and we're talking about Ron returning as artist in residence at the Detroit Jazz Festival. And it was a hot August afternoon, after handing me some water, he said, would you like to hear some music? It's like, Ron Carter is going to put some music on. Oh my God. What's he going to play? What's he going to put on? And, it was interesting. It was a drummer, Joey Barron. It was one of his records with Ron on bass and with the wonderful saxophonist, Arthur Blythe. And I thought, oh, I got to remember this forever. Ron Carter, out of his vast library, pulls this out and puts it on and goes, you like that? Yeah, man, I do like that a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. Because it was cutting edge, it had a very contemporary modern sound to it. But you could hear that everybody in that band knew how to look over their shoulder and pull, and pull from the past. And, many people seem to be afraid to do that for the sake of being stuck in the mud. And it's not like that at all, because if you don't have that kind of reference, where does your traction come from? And I hear a lot of that in your conversations during milestones with the various guests that you've had.
Oh, yes. I think that it's important to, and I don't mean to be one of the in my day people, but I have to be honest when I say that there's a certain part of the youth culture where it's cool not to know. It's almost yeah, it's a badge of honor. Man, I don't know nothing about that. I'm just trying to, do this, or where the disconnect is
Is a
cool,
proud moment.
is a proud moment, and that ain't cool. That ain't cool, because even in my generation, when hip hop was really, being born and shaped and things like that, and Salt and Pepper, had a song, and my mother would say, "Well, that ain't nothing but Otis Redding's Tramp," But what, and it was true. It was just a sample of Otis Redding. But what I think our parents appreciate now, 30, 40, we're in the 50th anniversary of hip hop this year, is that, um, or is it next year? Don't quote me on that, but it's
I
coming
think
up.
it's I think it's this year.
Yeah, I think it is this year. I think what they appreciate in hindsight is that sampling was a way to keep us connected. It was a way to keep us connected to our roots. And even if you listen to the lyrics, you might hear Slick Rick quote, Michelle My Belle, or KRS-One, quote, Hey Jude, in Criminal Minded, or whatever it is. Um, the cultural references are there. There's still a whether it's used in a metaphor or whatever it is, but they're reaching back. And now we've gotten to a place that, frankly, Gary, I'm nervous for our youth, because the disconnect is something that they're popping their collar about. I don't know nothing about that, and it's okay to diss early hip hop pioneers and things like that. So for me, uh, I hope to, in some way, and I'm no longer the youth culture. You know what I mean? But feel like I'm in that in between space where maybe they can still relate to me, where they're not like, oh, you could be my mom, because I could at this point. But what I hope they walk away with is an understanding that nothing is created in a vacuum, for good or bad. And when we're talking about music, we've got to give it up. We've got to make sense of things, and we've got to not just honor and all of those things, but we also it also makes sense, and we need to follow the path. So I think once we disconnect, it reflects in the music, and we're in a little bit of trouble. That said, there's some wonderful young artists who I think are, maybe we're at the beginning of a renaissance in another way, perhaps. But my goal is to talk to people who are doing music today about music of the past, so that we can see the thread, that we can rediscover it, we can unpack it in really fun, different ways. And that's what music is supposed to be. It's supposed to bring us together. It's supposed to connect dots and close loops, and yes, be a continuum. But it's a cliche, but we can't know where we're going if we don't know where we came from.
There
That
you go. Amen. Amen. Well, I'll tell you, it is always a pleasure chatting with you. We should do this again 35 years from now. just, just terrible, Gary. Terrible.
we
You
got to
know,
do it sooner than that, because this has been such a pleasure.
WBGO Studios and Milestones premieres on Friday, January the 13th. A lucky day for you if you find yourself in the WBGO Studios to check that out. We're chatting with Angelika Beener. She's got some great things lined up, and I foresee that perhaps some of those future episodes will have some of these young people that you alluded to talking about looking over their shoulder and not being afraid to do it, to move things up the field.
That's right.
That to me is a milestone in itself.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Gary. You are a master at what you do, so it's really an honor to be in this seat, being interviewed and getting to chop it up with you.
Well, I'll tell you, the only thing that's changed for me outside of Discovery is after 45 years of wearing headphones, you just have to speak up a little bit, because I never kept them at the low volume. I mean, it's like,
Oh,
make
uh-huh.
your ears rumble, man. That's what you're looking for.
And all
Milestone.
those amazing concerts you went to. See.
Oh, those concerts are incredible. And the stories behind the music. When I first started at WBGO, there was a guy I worked on the weekends from 6 to 10, and there was a guy who followed me. And in those days, in 1982, you wouldn't walk in Military Park at noon, let alone at midnight. So you were always very aware of what was going on around you. And one day I'm putting away records, and Anthony's on the air, and I heard something in the other room, and I didn't think he had an interview that morning. And I said, Anthony, I think there's somebody in the other room. And he goes, oh, yeah, it's my wife. It's okay. She came down with me. Go ahead and introduce yourself. So I went up and I introduced myself, and they had just moved from the South to the area. I had just moved from the Midwest to the area. And I said, well, I know what Anthony wants to do because he's doing it, and he had a job on the side doing public relations for his uncle, who at the time was the mayor of East Orange, New Jersey. So I said, what would you like to do? And she said, well, I'm a singer, and I want to test my mettle in the jazz capital of the world. And I was talking with Cassandra Wilson.
Whoa.
And just the look in her eyes, I still remember.
Wow.
That persistence and that go-get-it-ness was right there in that one moment. It's like, oh, well, I'm an actor, and who isn't?
Right, exactly.
But it's the way she said it. And I thought, And then look what she did. You talk about this, with Greg Osby, about the M bass and all that going on. And Cassandra was out there with Jerry Allen and, everybody that when they were recreating something new in the 80s, she was right there.
Yes, she was. I have a large framed poster of her looming over my son's drum set. So we look at her every day. Yeah.
You remind me of when Christian was talking about going to his uncle's house, and he said he walked in and his uncle had that wall size poster of Marvin Gaye from the cover of What's Going On. He said, I got to tell you, Marvin used to scare me when I was a young boy.
And I had to ask him another time. I said, do you still have that poster? Is it anywhere that, and someone might not want it? He said, I don't know where it is now. He said, but that thing was life size.
But see, these are all the backstories and all the little, the little intimate moments that inform someone's life as a musician, as a listener. And that's one of the reasons, probably one of the bigger reasons, that I ask you not to forget Friday, January the 13th, when Milestones premieres as part of WBGO Studios. And what a pleasure it's been today to chat with Angelika Beener about this, past and present and future. And I look forward to seeing you in person again. We used to sit in these meetings. I don't remember what the hell they were about, but we used to sit in these meetings when you did public relations at the station many years ago.
And sometimes I'd come down to your office and we would chat down there too. And that was really cool.
And I remember the book you loaned me, Notes and Tones.
Yes.
Notes and Tones. And then, of course, I read it, and being Gary, I didn't put it in the mail and send it back to her. And she started calling me and go, Gary, did you put that book in the mail back to me yet? Said, yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Yes,
but see, it's that persistence that got your book back. And it's that persistence that keeps our connection. One time I loaned a friend of my ex-wife's a signed Kurt Vonnegut book. Kurt Vonnegut for years was a big-time supporter of WBGO.
What? I didn't know that.
I ran into him. We were doing this live remote from the City Corp building, right adjacent to the church there, right? Or the Jazz Church, and 51st in Lexington. And so I walked upstairs into the little bodega-like place, and here's this guy standing there. And I thought, well, that's Kurt Vonnegut. And I walked up to him and I said, excuse me, Mr. Vonnegut, it's an honor. I love your work. I've read not all of your books, but a lot of your books. And he looked at me and said, well, you have to know how much I love jazz.
What? Wow. He recognized your voice? Or
Well, he had seen me hosting downstairs.
Oh, right.
And
Gotcha.
he was there watching the stuff going on. We had a young unknown cat that had just come to New York. It was kind of we were recreating like a Mardi Gras scenario. It was February.
Mhm.
And Dorthon put music acts in every one of the little venues there. There were little coffee shops and stuff. They never had music in there in their lives. So out front, we had Henry Butler, we had Dr. John, and this unknown kid who had just come up from Kenner, Louisiana, named Harry Connick Jr. And they all performed, and people would just walk through. You know, the traffic itself lent to a pretty nice audience.
Mhm.
And then hopefully they would go back to their offices and go, you won't believe what I just saw.
That's right. That's right. Kurt Vonnegut, though. Wow.
I know,
That's
isn't it something?
That is deep. That is deep. When are you writing your book, Gary?
You know, you remember Phoebe Jacobs?
No.
Phoebe Jacobs, she was a longtime part of the Louis Armstrong Educational Foundation in New Orleans. But her professional life, she was the press agent for people like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington. She was an amazing woman. And one day I met her. She had come to Torno Time Machine, where we used to do these lunchtime concerts.
Mhm.
And she had come there one day with her boyfriend. Now, she was into her 80s at the time.
Go ahead.
And her boyfriend had this earring hanging down. I thought, well, how cool is this guy? And you know who she was dating? Lenny Kravitz's dad.
Oh, no way. No way.
Phoebe was a trip. But people used to say to her, Phoebe, when are you going to write your book?
Mhm.
And somebody even bought her one of those little mini recorders, you know.
Yeah.
I can never get this damn thing to work right. It's here in my purse.
Well, you know how to work all of this stuff. So
Well, I do.
You don't have an excuse.
Someday, maybe. Maybe you'll have me on as a guest in your podcast. See, that's
There you go.
That's that's lifting that I think I could handle. A whole book. I don't know. That's kind of that's scary.
Well, consider it done, and I can't wait to do that. That would be amazing.
A pleasure today, and please tell Riley Glasper that he's made a big impression on me. I am gonna go out and check these people out, because I hear that name Jay Dilla, and I have to. This is how much I know about Jay Dilla.
Mm-hmm.
About this much, and I need to know more, not just professionally, but personally. I want to know more, because of the influence that I hear about this person from people all around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not one of those people who go, I don't know nothing about that.
Right.
That scares me, what you were talking about earlier, though.
Me too. So we're all going to do our part to see that we make a dent in that for the better.
We continue to represent.
Hey.
Good talking to you today, and I'll see you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gary.
Angelika Beener on the WBGO Studios. Milestones, January the 13th. Be there. I know I will. What a great series.